So normally on this podcast, we don't talk about women's basketball, but I think that the talent that they have right now is just too insane to not talk about it. You have not only the players in this draft class, but you have Juju Watkins, who's going to be available in a few years, and she just dropped 50 points. Now, this wasn't 50 points against like some random nobody, Cal, Fullerton, whatever. This was against Stanford, who at the moment of this podcast is the number 4 ranked team in the nation.
I think it was on the road too.
On the road too, yes, you're right. So I feel like, women's basketball gets a lot of flack and they get clowned a lot, but I feel like they're in a really good spot going forward just because you look at all the stars that they have and you look at Juju's performance last night, like she looked insane.
Yeah.
I think she had like 6 threes. She was knocking down many pull-ups too. Like it was a masterpiece at all 3 levels.
Yeah. I mean, it's very easy to say that Caitlin Clark is the best player in women's college basketball. And, she's in her final year. She's going to be moving on. But I don't know if there's somebody more talented right now in college in the NCAA and women's basketball than Juju Watkins. We're seeing all these things about Caitlin Clark breaking, records for scoring in a career. I feel like that's in the future for Juju Watkins. If she's as a freshman putting up these monster numbers, they're going to force her to play 4 years at USC, or if she ends up transferring, I doubt it. But pretty much right from the beginning of the season, they had an early game against Ohio State where she just dominated. I've been kind of on the feeling that she is probably the best and maybe the most entertaining player right up there with Caitlin Clark as a freshman, which is pretty impressive stuff.
Yeah, she's someone that I've kind of became aware of when she was in high school at Sierra Canyon, like just watching a couple of her highlights. And she's serious. Like she's one of the best women's players I've ever seen. I agree with you that I think she's probably the most talented player in women's basketball, which really sucks that she can't leave right away. I think for the WNBA's future, allowing girls to leave earlier, especially when they get to build fan bases like quickly, is big for their survival going forward. But as far as Juju just herself, she's an elite shot creator, and like her jump shot is just, it's pure. Like it's a lot of her highlights in Stanford, the ball didn't hit the rim.
Yeah.
She's insane. Like she doesn't have the flashiest handle, but it works. Like it moves people and it gets her space. And it's something like, I think she could play in the WNBA right now. How about
100%.
For sure.
And I understand why there's a difference between, the one and done rule being in the NBA and the 4 years for WNBA. A lot of it has to do with the money and the contracts that are available. But we've seen NBA players in the past go and still get their degree later on in their career if they leave early. I don't understand why in women's college basketball they don't have that same opportunity. Like the season's shorter, they play in the summers. They could, spend their time outside of that. If they're not playing overseas or something, they could go do the same thing that the guys in the NBA have the opportunity to do. And we've seen a recent example with Paige Beckers had that insane hype going into her freshman year, dealing with huge injuries. And luckily for her, she's still, playing at an elite level and is probably going to be one of the top picks this year. But that's not the case for all players. And sometimes when you have that hype and something bad happens, like an injury, sometimes you don't recover and your career can be derailed just because of a stupid rule that makes you stay long.
Mm-hmm. I think, you kind of touched on it a bit too, but we all know that quote from Angel Reese where it's like, if you're good enough, like, it's almost more beneficial to stay from a financial standpoint just because NIL and stuff. But, you can, and when you get to the WNBA, you can get those endorsements. But for whatever reason, it feels like women's college basketball is just drawing more attention than the WNBA. But I'm also hopeful that, because we have so much talent, it's not going to happen right away. Like, it's probably going to take some time. But, like, as more and more players start to really show out and come in. And I feel like, this class and when Juju goes in, it's really going to help the WNBA. And you also think about the talent that the WNBA has now with, like, just look at the finals this year. Like, that was probably the most hyped final series of all time. You know, you had the Aces, the Liberty, and it was a decent series too. And you have more young talent coming in. So, you know, you're hoping that after time, you know, you'll kind of see that start to change. And with with the influx of young players, they'll just realize, like, you guys can make an impact right away.
Yeah, to you guys' point, I think college basketball for women's is a lot bigger at the moment. And I think that's mostly because the players that, like, people are really genuinely excited about are younger. Like, if you just took women's basketball as a whole, if I say women's basketball, the first names that come to mind are the Caitlin Clarks, are the Angel Reeses, are the Juju Watkins, and I think that's when the WNBA is kind of hurting itself a little bit.
Yeah.
And I understand why, because there's only so many teams and there's only so many jobs. And you've seen, like, a lot of top picks in the WNBA draft don't make the team, or make the team and they're off the team within, like, the first 3 years of their career. So it's a tough thing, but I think the expansion coming up with them moving teams to, like, I think they're getting a new San Francisco team. I think that'll help. And I think increasing the number of roster spots will be, like, I think those are the right steps to take to get rid of having your best talent waste away in college, which, like you guys said, is just more time they can get hurt before they get to the WNBA. And it's, after you play so long in college, your game has, like, no choice but to become systemized. Like, it becomes... It's almost like you're putting a player in a box. Like, when you have high school kids, they play a lot freer, and while they probably need to work on the fundamentals a little bit more, it creates a more entertaining brand of basketball in a way. That's why I think some of the WNBA, some of the hate they get is just because it's a lot of system play, and it's because all those players spent 4 years in college. Like,
Yeah.
That would be something interesting to kind of see and get a kind of player's perspective on, because you hear NBA players, you know, Gilbert Arenas, he went on his podcast and he talked about how high school ball for his game was more beneficial than the college. So you almost wonder, like, what do WNBA players think about that? Like, you know, you have a lot of high-level coaches in basketball and women's basketball, like Gino, but you do wonder if the play style in high school kind of is more similar to professional basketball. But I guess, you know, somebody will talk about it at some point.